Thank you so much, Fatima, yeah, for the so good words about me. And as we all know that because of this virtual presence, there are so many technicalities and there are glitches also, and almost 15 minutes I have to waste for this. But anyhow, the topic which is assigned to me, that is research ethics and plagiarism. So first of all, the very important thing about this is why do we research? That is basically to contribute or to expand the knowledge, or how do we do this? That is by building on the works of the others. So simply, I would like to say that the very purpose of the research is just to find out the truth, to contribute to the existing knowledge, and at the same time, to complete the work or to expand the work of the earlier researchers where they have left, or the areas which they have not touched about. So the researchers, they are expected to place the research in the right context, that is to show that whether they are aware of what else is happening around them, or to show that what they understand, where they are working for, that is good work or not. So all these things which are related to the purpose of the research. But the very first thing, because this FDP is going on for the last 1 week, I think, and today is the last day, so all the participants must be aware about what is research and how to go about the research and various issues, stages related to the research. But ethics is very important because research is something which is said to be systematic. This is a socially organized quest for the new and better insight. And many research results can be useful for improving the social conditions. When we talk of the research in the social sciences, in the humanities, in legal arena, then basically we touch upon the social conditions, the social fabric of the society on which we do the research. So that is very, very useful for improving that also. However, the ultimate responsibility of the researcher is just to seek the truth as to what is the reality, how to go about that. So accordingly, we see that integrity is a key aspect of the research ethics. And research ethics as a concept that refers to a complex set of values, some standards, and also the institutional schemes on the basis of which the researcher has to work, and that helps to constitute and regulate the research activity also. Or in other words, or in simple words, we can say that it is based on the general ethics of the common sense, general ethics of the morality also. And there are different stages of the research, we all know. When a researcher starts research, then he has to go through different stages, and those stages that include the research problem, research questions, then research design is to be there, how to collect the data, how to analyze the data, and then to reach the research results, and how to disseminate those results, how to publish those results. So there are various stages of the research, and in each stage, the researchers need to follow the ethical standards and norms. And there are certain responsibilities also of the researcher. What are those standards? What are those ethics which the researcher has to follow during different stages of the research? For example, when the researcher starts with the research problem as to what is to be the problem on which researcher has to work, then you see the first question, which is ethical and which is very of a normal value, that a researcher must ask, that is it a significant problem on which the researcher is going to work, whether that will be benefiting to others also, or whether that work should be worth of the public money, because research includes the various types of the research. For example, the dissertation is a work of research, PhD is a work of research, project is a work of research, and writing papers is also a result of the research. So in different types of the research, money is also involved in various types of the research. The public is also involved, the social benefits are involved. So while deciding for the research problem, the first thing that is significant is that the problem itself, on the problem on which the researcher starts working, whether that would be benefiting to the others or not, and whether that is part of the using this public money or not. Or secondly, another point which has to be keep in mind at the time of the solving this research problem or starting with the research problem is that whether the researcher has done a thorough literature review to see if other study exists on that particular point or not. And thirdly, the researcher must also see, or this is one of the ethics also, that whether it is ethical to repeat the study if it has been done earlier also, because during the literature review, the researcher must have come across that what type of the research has already been done on the problem which the researcher want to select for himself, which he want to formulate for himself or herself as a researcher, and then to see that on the problem which the researcher decides to work, whether it is not a repetition of the earlier work or not. So it would be unethical for the researcher to repeat the work which has already been done earlier by the earlier researcher, because the researcher has to build on the earlier matter, earlier work, but it doesn't mean that to repeat or to replicate or to duplicate the earlier work. The researcher has to do something new, something which has been left by the earlier researcher. So it has to be seen as a research problem on which the earlier work is done. There should not be the repetition, because it would be something like unethical for the researcher while selecting the research problem. Then the second point is that relating to the second stage, which is relating to the research, is the research question. When the problem has been formulated, problem has been selected by the researcher, then another stage is that the researcher has to form certain research questions on the basis of which the researcher has to further pursue the study in that particular research. So it is important to see that does it expose the participants to unacceptable risk of invasion or the privacy. Because another ethics which a researcher has to follow is that in that research question, if it is an empirical study, if it is a study wherein more and more participants are required, more research subjects are required, then to see that whether that research would be interfering in the privacy rights of the other persons who are participating in that. And secondly, at the same time, the researcher has to identify the purpose of the study to the participants. That is also ethical on the point of the researcher. Then while making the research design, the different items on which the researcher has to proceed further, then it has to be seen that the choice of the researcher for the study design, that is ethical choice or not, that is observational versus interventional work of the research design, or is there any benefit of that research, or whether there is something which is involved, some risk is involved in that research. So what is the ratio of the benefit and the risk, then to balance and then to proceed further for that research. And then the methodology which the researcher is applying for the research, whether that is a sound methodology which the researcher has to follow in the work. And further, another question which is important for the researcher, which is ethical also, that is to see that whether the researcher is having the expertise on that particular subject area on which he or she decides to work upon. So the very important thing for the researcher is that there must be a pilot study to see that whether the researcher can work on that particular area or not. That is also very important. Then another stage while working for the research, that comes the data collection. And in that data collection, as I told you that if it is an empirical study, then data has to be collected, and more and more respondents are to be there. Research participants would be there, research subjects would be there. The researcher has to go to various research sites also. So in that, all the confidentiality and privacy of the participants must be kept there by the researcher. The researcher has to take special care of the privacy as well as the confidentiality of that matter while collecting the data. So this is also one of the important factor in this stage of data collection during the research work. Then when the data is collected, another stage that comes is the data analysis. And in that data analysis, it has to be seen that how the researcher protect the anonymity of the participants. That is, one thing is that confidentiality has to be maintained. But when it has come to writing the results at the time of analysis of that data, then what type of the anonymity is to be maintained by the participants by the researcher. So how the researcher will analyze the data. So whether the researcher has the experience of that or not, in that way the supervisor also come in between. That the supervisor has to monitor all these things properly, so that there may not be any interference in the privacy, in the confidentiality of the research subjects. So, so in data analysis, it is also very important for the researcher to maintain the anonymity of the research participants. Then you see the research dissemination or the publication of the research results, that is the final stage of any research work. So in that way, it has to be seen regarding the authorship. So who will do and who will do what, who will do when, what shall be the authorship orders, and if there is any conflict of the interest, then it has to be seen that it has to be put in a very, very honest manner. So different type of the ethics are required during different stages of the research. Because if the researcher will not keep in its mind various ethics while performing the research, while proceeding for the research, then there would be different types of the possible harms which may be inflicted therein. For example, there may be some physical harm, there may be psychological harm, there may be social, economic, or legal harm that may result if the ethics are not being followed, particularly in the matters of the vulnerable populations, in the matter of the informed consents to the person concerned, informed consent about the research, and informed consent about the participants. This is all the ethical principles which need to be followed by the researcher. So when considering ethics, the academic integrity discussion tends to revolve around that there is cheating, there is plagiarism, there is dishonesty, there is research fraud, and other academic malpractices. And the question is how best to prevent these behaviors of the researcher. So it becomes very important to know what are the research ethics which a researcher need to follow. That is, everybody must be aware about. There are different types of the ethics which a researcher has to follow. Honesty is to be there, objectivity is to be there, integrity is to be there. The researcher must take reasonable care while working, and the intellectual property of the others, that has to be respected. This confidentiality, anonymity is to be there. The researcher should be open for the comments and for the suggestions from the others also. So there are various ethics which a researcher need to follow. So first virtue or the first ethics which a researcher need to follow is honesty, as I told you. So a researcher should strive, or he should endeavor for the honesty in all the communications. Because there are various stages, as I just told you. So at every stage, this honesty is very important. And the researcher should honestly report this all the data and the results, the methods and the procedures which have been followed during the research, and the publication status also. So honesty is very important for the researcher. He should not fabricate, or you should say that the researcher should not falsify or misrepresent the data. So whatever data exactly the researcher had, that data has to be represented. It should not be fabricated, or there shall not be any false data. So honesty has to be maintained in that data reporting also. And the researcher should not deceive also to the others, or to the colleagues, to the research sponsors, or to the public at large. Because as I told you that the researches in the humanities, in the social sciences, they are basically related to the society. So in society where the public, they are the people, they are there. So if the researcher is falsifying the data, if the researcher is fabricating the data, then of course is going to affect the public at large. So the researcher should not deceive the public or the research sponsors also. And the researchers have a responsibility also for preventing that the research results from being presented in a misleading manner. And it is unethical, of course, to place the limits on the research to elicit particularly the desirable results. So whatever results are coming after performing the entire research, after proceeding for the research, those results must be put as a disseminating part of the research. It should not be like the researcher desires that this should be the result, and the result is coming something different. So if it is not desirable, then the results would not be correct, the results would be wrong, and that would of course affect the public and the research sponsor. So it is unethical to give the data which is not correct. And also it is not to produce the research results in an intentionally skewed manner. I mean to say that the researcher should not twist the results as per convenience. So whatever the researcher wants to put before the public, whatever the researcher puts before the authorities as a research work, before the agencies as a research work, as per the convenience, that should not be there. The data must be correct, and the data must not be fabricated or false data. So honesty has to be maintained because honesty is the basis to reach the truth, and the very purpose, as I told you, of the research is just to reach the truth. So until and unless the researcher is following this honesty as an ethical principle, as a virtue, then the results would not be correct, and the researcher cannot reach to the final truth on which he or she is going to work. Then another ethics which a researcher should have in mind while performing or while pursuing for the research is the objectivity. That is, objectivity can be said to be another norm and value that every researcher must have while doing the research. Researcher should try to avoid bias in experimental designs. He should avoid this biasness in any data analysis or data interpretation also. Because I have some hypothesis, I have a research question, researchers has some research question, and the result would be yes, while after collecting the data and analysis of that data, the result is going to be no. So the researcher must not do all these things, and the researcher must put the things in the manner as the data has been analyzed. So data interpretation and data analysis, that all should be given by the researcher in his work without using any biasness in the work. There should not be any partiality in the peer review, in the personal decisions and other aspects of the research. That is to say that where the objectivity is expected, or where the objectivity is required, the researcher need to be very, very cautious in putting the correct results. Then they should avoid or minimize the bias or self-deception. Self-deception is very, very unethical also. So while doing the research, the researcher must always be very, very ethical. And the researcher should disclose the personal or financial interest that may affect the research also. And because the objectivity is a norm which makes the researcher to follow the ethical principles. Then besides objectivity, you see the carefulness is also very important ethics. And in that carefulness, you see the researcher should avoid the careless errors and negligence. For that, careful and critical examination of the work is essential. Researcher should keep good records of the research activities as to what the researcher is doing, how the data has been collected, what type of the work is required, what type of the data is required, and how to collect that data, how to make that research design, and all the correspondence with the agencies, with the journals. So everything has to be taken with very, very carefulness by the researcher concerned. This is also one of the value in a researcher that is very important. Then integrity is important because this is one of the ethics which a researcher is required to follow. And researcher should keep the promises and agreements which are there and act with sincerity. The researcher should try for the particularly consistency of thoughts and actions. So whatever data is there, on the basis of that, how to analyze that data, how to make that data as the part of the final result, or to interpret that data. In that all way, the researcher should follow this integrity as one of the ethical rules for the research. And at the same time, openness is also very important. And the researcher should share the data, should share the results, the ideas also, the tools and the resources the researcher has to share with others also. And at the same time, you see, researcher should also be open to the criticisms. And he should also be open for the new ideas which are coming. And further, if you see if something important is missing in the work, then the researcher should incorporate that in his work. And for this, the researcher may seek guidance of the others because the openness is very important. Openness for having the criticism from others and having the new ideas from the others. That is one of the ethics that can bring you, or that can bring the researcher to reach that truthfulness for which the particular research work is going on. Then importantly, the confidentiality as well as the anonymity is important. That is one of the ethics, and the researcher is under obligation to respect the confidentiality. Confidentiality of the research participants, confidentiality of the research subjects. So to protect the confidential communications such as the papers or grants submitted for the publications, the personal records, the other secrets and the patient records, because there may be different types of the research. So researcher should not disclose the names, for example. Anonymity should be maintained for that, and the researcher must respect the individual's privacy and the close relationships. Researcher shall show due respect for the individual's privacy particularly. And the participants, they must be entitled to check whether the confidential information about them is accessible to others or not. So the researcher should respect the privacy, the matter which is coming for that purpose, that must be kept in the confidentiality. Anonymity has to be maintained, and the researchers aim at protecting the individuals against the unwanted interference and the exposure. Because you see that the researcher, if the researcher is preventing the use and the dissemination of the information that could harm the individual research subjects, that could harm the research participants. For example, if there is a research which is going on the LGBT's status or the rights of the LGBT persons, and the health issues of the HIV infected persons, the victims of the sexual offenses, and so on. Different types of the researches may go on. So the researcher has to follow or to perform this ethics, that everything has to be kept in confidentiality. If the message, if the research is relating to the sexual offenses, or the victims of the sexual offenses are to be the research subjects, then the anonymity has to be maintained. Their name should not be disclosed. And in cases of the HIV infected cases, also in cases of the LGBT rights. So that has to be taken care by the researcher, because this is one of the important ethics. The persons who are belonging to the different religious opinions, the persons who are belonging to different sexual orientation, there may be researches which may involve different types of the sicknesses, that may involve different types of the health issues, the political informations or the religious opinions. These are all the issues which are related to the, which are said to be the emotional issues also. This applies to all these types of the issues where the confidentiality has to be maintained, and the researcher has to take extra care to maintain the privacy of the research subjects as one of the ethics. Then sometimes you see the researcher has to work on some person concerned, and for example, if the person is died, then respect for that posthumous reputation of the person, that is also a part of the research ethics. The caution has to be exercised when the deceased people are the subjects of the research, as the deceased cannot raise any objection, but that doesn't reduce the requirement for meticulous documentation. So out of respect for the deceased and their surviving relatives, researchers must choose their words with care. In cases relating to the picturization or making of the films, you see on some period films are being made. So you see that if the period film is made on some of the deceased persons, so the respect is very important for the reputation of that person who is deceased. And you see that the surviving relatives who are there, so researcher must choose their words. And you see that the graves and the the remains must be treated with utmost respect where the research is concerned. Then there are certain social responsibilities also. Researchers should strive to promote the social good and to prevent or to mitigate or to reduce the social harms through research or research publication. There's public education and advocacy. That is the researcher's responsibility. If the researcher is working on some of the issues which are relating to some social evils, then it is not only confined within your research work as a matter of the writings, but for that the dissemination of that research must be the part of the that it should reach to the society as a matter of the social responsibility. The researcher has to promote those for the social good, so that all these types of the social evil, social harms, those may be prevented and protected to some extent. Then very importantly, one of the factor which has taken the status of the research ethics, research value, responsibility of the researcher, that is the non-discrimination. Now, we all know that India is a country full of diversities. It is a plural country with different castes and different creeds. So the researcher should avoid the discrimination. Discrimination on the basis of sex, discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, or other factors which are not related to the scientific competence and integrity. So researcher should respect the vulnerable groups also, and he should bear a responsibility for protecting the interest of those groups, the interest of the different persons who are there in the society throughout the research process. Because you see that, as I told you, India is a country which is based on the plural concepts. There are different types of the vulnerable groups, marginalized groups, disadvantaged individuals and groups are there. Those groups, they are not always be equipped to defend their own interest in respect of the researchers. So the researcher has to take extra care, and he or she should not discriminate while working for that particular group. So accordingly, you see that the researcher cannot take it for granted that the ordinary procedures for taking the information from those groups and the consent will ensure that the individual's self-determination is to be there, or that can protect them from unreasonable suffering. No, special care has to be taken that may not give rise to unreasonable generalization, which may result in the stigmatization of the particular social group. So researcher must show respect for the values and for the views of all the research subjects who are belonging to any of the vulnerable group, marginalized group, and disadvantaged groups, because non-discrimination is a very important ethics for a researcher. Then, as I told you that while selecting the problem, the researcher has to see whether he is competent to work upon that. So competence is also one of the important ethics, because a researcher need to maintain and improve the professional competence. The expertise through lifelong education and learning. The researcher has to do all these things, and the researcher has to take these steps to promote the competence. That is very, very important for him. And to do the untiring efforts by adding some more and more time. If something is not being understood by the researcher in one reading or two readings, then the researcher must add some more time to read that particular article or literature if the same is not being understood by the researcher, because you see that quality is not a result of the chance, but it is the result of the hard work. So researcher is always required to do the hard work, and it is not like that the researcher has to submit the work, so any work which is not good is the quality in quality can be submitted. No, the researcher has to see whether he is competent to do, because in today's scenario, what is going on? There are 4 vacancies, there are 8 vacancies for with a teacher concerned. All the vacancies are to be filled by the person, by the students, candidates who are desiring to do the research. Whether that research aptitude is there in the researcher or not, that is not now material in many of the universities. So it is important for the researcher also that once the researcher, when the candidate becomes the student or a scholar, takes the admission in any of the university for doing the research, then he or she has to develop that competence by doing some extra efforts, untiring efforts, by doing hard work, so that he may prove to be competent. Professional competence may be improved, so that the researcher may work on that particular project or the particular issue on which the research has to be completed. So this is also very, very important. Then besides competence, the legality is important as an ethics, and the researcher must know and obey the relevant laws as to what are the laws which are existing, and what are the policies and the rules and regulations which are there, which are existing in the particular institution, or the government policies are there relating to some certain matters. For example, the research is going to be on some animals, then the animal care is very, very important. There are rules, there are laws, there are governmental policies also, how to go about that. So this is all the work which the researcher has to follow. Then at the same time, if the research is to be in the legal arena, you see that there are different researchers, they are working on the particular legal issue. So they must always be updated. They have to keep their knowledge updated, that what the laws are there, is there any amendment to the particular law or not, and what is the modification, what new things are coming, what the Supreme Court decisions are there. So without knowing or without having the updated knowledge, whatever is being written, that would not be a very good work, and that would not be able to reach to the truth. So that is one of the important factors that the researcher must keep in mind, because you see that the thesis may be submitted in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, and the student who is working on the labor laws must not be aware about the labor codes. So that research would need to lead to nothing, because the student or the researcher is not aware about that. Similarly, the new amendments which are coming or which are changing the entire concept even, for example, Consumer Protection Act is amended, Motor Vehicle Act is amended, and so many acts are amended. And the researcher is not taking into cognizance all those new amendments and modifications in the laws or the new laws which are coming up. So that result would not reach to the truth. And one of the norms or the standard for the researcher is that he must be updated, or he must update his knowledge regarding that. Then conveying the results, so that is also very important norm for a researcher, because you see that the researchers bear a special obligation to convey the results to the participants, to the research subjects, in a very, very comprehensible and responsible manner. Not only to inform the results, but some more ethics are required for the researcher. That is, the research subjects are to be given all the informations, what the researcher needs to gain about from that research, then like a reasonable understanding of the field of the research in question, what shall be the consequences of participating in the research project. So what is the purpose of the research? Researchers shall respect the subjects, their integrity, their freedom, and the right to participate in that. So we see that as a general rule, the research that includes the individuals, that can be initiated only after securing the participants' free and informed consent. So that obtaining that free and informed consent becomes very important. And the research subjects can withdraw from the participation at any time, and researcher should be especially compassionate when they ask the questions that involve the intimate issues, and they should avoid placing informant under the pressure. What is perceived as sensitive information, that can vary from one individual to another individual. So the researcher has to take care all these things while obtaining the information from the research subjects and the participants. And before obtaining those informations from the research subjects, the participants must be informed about as to what types of the questions are to be asked from the participants, and they must give their consent also to participate in that research project. So that is one of the important ethics. Then publication that the researcher has to do, that must be a responsible publication. As we all know that knowledge is a collective benefit, and accordingly, as a rule, that all the research results should be published so that they may get wider publicity. You see that various PhDs, the students, they take their degree, and after getting that degree, they utilize those degrees for their career opportunities, and the research work which is there in the PhDs, those are lying in the libraries, and that is not published. So what the research has been done by the researcher, that must be published, because that research which has been done by the researcher, that may get wider publicity. The persons, the public, they will be aware, and they will know as to what type of the research is there and what are the results of those research. So it is important that the results which have been published, those can be verified also. Publication is important for the researcher's merit list, but the researcher must publish the research in order to, you say, advance the research and scholarship also. and not just to advance one's own career. As I told you, that they are not going to publish, or if they publish, then it only 10 copies or 5 copies of the research work for the purpose of their own career. That is not to be there, but it has to be a wider publicity. And it has because as I told you, it is a collective benefit for the knowledge of all the persons, so it has to be published. But publication should be very, very responsible. It is not confined to the increasing of the API. And you see, if the publication is made of the research thesis or the research work, then the researcher should avoid the duplicative publication. Now, duplicative publication, that is also known the slicing of the research. That would form one meaningful paper into several different papers. And that is also known as the salami publication or salami slicing. So that should be avoided. Unlike a duplicate publication, which involves the reporting the exact same data in 2 or more publications, and the salami slicing involve the breaking up or segmenting, separating a large study into 2, 3, 4 or more publications. 5 chapters, 6 chapters are there, and 6 papers have been published along with the entire research publication. So this slicing of this publication or duplicate publication, that should be avoided. This is against the ethics. These segments which are referred as the slices of the study. So it should be avoided, and breaking of the data or in a single study in more and more papers, that should be avoided. So while the paper is to be submitted for publication, the researcher should be very, very transparent in publication of that data and results. He or she should send the copies of the manuscripts which are related to the publication. And if the manuscript or the paper is sent for publication to one publication and that is under consideration there, then he or she should not send the same for another publication. So there are certain research ethics for the publication also. Publication has to be there, but that should be very, very responsible publication. Then besides that, the intellectual property of the others need to be respected by the researcher. Because you see that there exist many of the works, so researchers should honor the patents, the copyrights, and the other forms of the intellectual property. And researchers should not use the unpublished data, methods, or unpublished results without the permission of the original author. And the researcher should give the proper acknowledgement or credit for all the contributions to the research. So if the research ethics are missing in the research work, that will result in the academic dishonesty and the plagiarism. So dishonesty, that is cheating, that is stealing, and this academic dishonesty, that means to some extent the plagiarism also. So academic dishonesty is an issue of concern of the worldwide. And it has become very fluent in genuine research activity, because the topic on which I am speaking, that is ethics and plagiarism. So both are to some extent interconnected, because if the researcher is not following research academic integrity, of course, the researcher is moving towards the academic dishonesty, and academic dishonesty is leading towards the plagiarism also. So you see that the problem of academic dishonesty is widespread among students around the world. It's not a matter which is confined to India, but it is around the world. That is there always. And the majority of students, they are involved in in at least one form or the other form of the academic dishonesty, which you see is leading to something like epidemic of cheating. The researcher, they don't use their mind, they don't use their ideas. This has become more prevalent with this advent of the web technology. And new technology has also made it easier to cheat. because cheating and stealing is one form of the academic dishonesty. So it has made it simpler for the students, for the researcher, for the academicians to enjoy this dishonest and immoral practices. This is resulting to some extent, I should say, it is also crippling the talent of the researcher. The researcher, they don't use their mind, they don't use their ideas, they are just copying and pasting everything for the purpose of their research work. And you see that the researchers, they are involved in academic dishonesty that is leading to the plagiarism. And there are various reasons also for that, why they are involved in all these type of the things. Because they want to maintain the performance and to achieve the goals. That has also increased, you see, the likelihood of cheating and the plagiarism. Thesis is to be submitted in time, the research paper has to be published, and to get the API index, to get the promotion. There may be some study pressure on the researcher. The work is not in an organized manner. The researcher is working for the 5 years, and the researcher has worked so many things, but at the time of submission, all the things are disorganized, and he has to work upon how to organize those things. So there is some pressure also on the students. So they involve in the academic dishonesty. The researcher may have very poor habits of the study also. This is also one of the reasons to involve in the academic dishonesty. At the same time, there is a language problem, because like we know that English is an international language, but many of the researchers may have the problem, and they use other works without understanding the seriousness of this plagiarism. And their supervisors may have not taken care in making them learn. And the referencing skills and many more reasons are there for choosing or for involving in the academic dishonesty. So you see that the UGC has asked to the central and the state universities to use the anti-plagiarism softwares to check the duplication in the PhD thesis, in the dissertation works, and the other publications which are there by the staff, faculty, students, and the research scholars in the university system. And it is also mandatory for the universities to use the anti-plagiarism softwares also before award of the PhD degrees. The UGC has earlier recommended for the Urkund software. So at this stage, it becomes essential for the researchers to know as to what is plagiarism, what are the consequences if a researcher does not follow the rules. So in simple words, plagiarism is the act of stealing others' work without acknowledging the original author's researcher. That is to say, an attempt to pass off the work of the other in researcher's own name. So UGC has come with some ethical standards, and in the name of some UGC regulation of 2018. Now, when we talk about the plagiarism, that is the using of the other's work without acknowledging the other's work, that is of the different types. And one of the most common types of the publication misconduct, that is plagiarism, is literally copying or paraphrasing in some other's work. Work may include data, work may include words and phrases, work may include ideas and concepts, and the various types of the work may be included in that, where the researcher can use this plagiarism. Quotations may be used, many more things. So plagiarism has a varying different level of severity. Like how much is copied of some work, others' work, Some lines have been copied, one or two paragraphs have been copied, few pages have been copied, or the full article has been copied. So the quantity, how much has been copied, then what was copied, the results have been copied, the methods which have been used by the earlier workers, authors, that has been copied, the introduction section has been copied. So different type of the things that is related to the different levels of the severity. And in that copying, another point that comes in the plagiarism is that whether there is a literal copying, that is reproducing a word for word in whole or in part without the permission and acknowledgement of the original source or original author, or there is a substantial copying that includes the research materials or the processes or the tables, etc., which have been used by the earlier author, or is there any paraphrasing, because this is very common now. So paraphrasing, that is reproducing someone else's ideas, though it is not said to be copying, because it is not copying word for word, but the idea is gained from the earlier work and that is reproduced in own words, that is paraphrasing. But that is again without the permission and acknowledgement of the original source. So make sure that the researcher has not changed the meaning which is intended by the original author. Make sure that the researcher understood what was the idea of the original author in that particular work while paraphrasing the same. Then there is another type of the plagiarism, that is text recycling. That is reproducing the portions of an author's own work in a paper and resubmitting it for publication as an entirely new paper. As I told you, the slicing or the duplicating publication. So this is also the part of this plagiarism. So text recycling. Sometimes the authors do that, the title or the main heading of the paper is changed and the entire article is the same. Sometimes the first or the second paragraph has been changed with the title and then sent again for the publication. Sometimes some quotes have been increased and something extra has been added and then sent for the publication. So you see that the entire paper remains the same, barring few recycling, and then the number increases of the publication. This is also coming under the plagiarism. And for that, you see at this stage, I think that one more question that should come to your mind is how one can know that the work, what work is plagiarized, or there is any tool to detect this, as Urukund, I told you that the UGC has started this software Urukund. So besides that, there are very many more tools also, and the websites are also which are going for this plagiarism detection tools, like Authenticate is there, plagiarism.org is there, Plag Tracker is there, Turnitin is there. Many more sites are there through which the researcher can have the detection that whether the work which he or she is doing, that is involving the plagiarism or not. Because education system is moving towards, you see, the chronic quality deficit and plagiarism to perpetuality. Rapid spread of this termite of plagiarism is eating the quality of our academics. So this, as I told you, the UGC has come forward with the regulations that is called the University Grants Commission, Promotion of Academic Integrity and Prevention of Plagiarism in Higher Educational Institution regulations, that is of 2018, and these regulations are operative since 31st July 2018. And that is applied over all the students, faculty, researchers, and staff in all the higher educational institutions in the country, with the objective to create the awareness among the student, faculty, researcher, and staff, and to establish the institutional mechanism to facilitate the responsible conduct of research, and at the same time to develop the system to detect the plagiarism. Various definitions have been given of the academic integrity, who shall be the author, who will be included in the faculty, all the regular, ad hoc, guest, temporary, visiting, they all are included in this faculty. Then what shall be the programs, researcher, institute, all plagiarism is to be what every definition has been given there in this regulation of 2018. And besides that, the duties of the higher educational institutions are also there. The awareness programs and trainings are to be conducted under these regulations of 2018. And besides that, you see the penalty provision is also there in this regulation, which the researcher must know, as if the researcher is using the work of other without the permission of the other, without acknowledging the other, then there would be penalty also, because the label of plagiarism has been given in these regulations, and there are four labels. Level one is known as the zero level, where 10% similarity is okay, that would not be considered to be a plagiarized work, and there would be no penalty. But level one, that is similarity where the similarity is more from 10% to 40%, that is level one, the penalty would be there. Level two, the similarity is 40 to 60%, penalty is there. Level three, similarity above 60%, the penalty is there. So penalty for the students is different, penalty for the faculty members are different. So these regulations also provide all the penalties, that if there would be 10 to 40%, the researcher will be asked to submit a revised script within 6 months. If it is between 40 to 60%, then the student would be debarred from submitting the revised script within a period of 1 year. If the similarity is 60% and above, then the student registration for that program will be cancelled. So penalty is always there in that case. And if it is related to the research publication, then in 10 to 40%, the researcher will be asked to withdraw the manuscript. If it is 40 to 60%, then the researcher would be asked to withdraw the manuscript. At the same time, one annual increment will also be denied to the researcher. And if it is level 3 plagiarism, that is 60% and above, then the researcher would be asked to withdraw the manuscript and would be denied 2 increments. And at the same time, the researcher would also be denied and will not be allowed to be a supervisor to any new master's, MPhil, PhD students for a period of 3 years. So the penalties are very deterrent in this regulation of 2018. And the penalty for repeated plagiarism are much harsher also in this regulation of 2013. And all these work has to be done by the or detection or reporting or handling of these cases through a mechanism which is also given under this regulation, that is Departmental Academic Integrity Panel and Institutional Academic Integrity Panel, which is required to be instituted, and the composition of that these mechanisms are to be there in every university. And that is also one of the provision in the regulation of 2018. So you see that very harsh rules have been made under this 2018 regulation regarding plagiarism for the students, scholars, and the faculties also. And to avoid this, I think that avoid the penalty, the researcher or any of the researcher must follow good reference practices. That is, all the writers and researchers, regardless of whether they are amateur or professional, students or established researchers, they shall strive to exercise good reference practices. The standards for citing quotations and referring to sources and literature, they differ from one subject to the other subject. We all know there are different types of the footnoting styles or referencing styles, APA, MLA, ILI, depending upon the different disciplines also. And the Oxford citation system or Chicago citation system. So there are various systems, but whatever standard is there for referencing, that has to be followed by the researcher. And everyone is obligated to give the most accurate references which are possible to the literature they use. So references should usually be to a particular pages, paragraphs, and chapters. So whatever style is to be followed, that style is to be followed in the entire work. It is not to be that different referencing systems are to be followed in one work. Then Researcher should not base all the study using Control C and Control V method. So with the advent of internet, as I told you, that has become very, very easy to go online and find the work of the others through search engines, copy, paste, and ready for submission work. So it should not be others' work. It should be the work of the researcher own work, which has to be submitted. So some more time has to be given by the researcher and without using this Control C and Control V, copy and paste. So if you are getting material on internet free, that doesn't mean or that doesn't give you the certificate to use that information and material as your own work without giving the credit, without acknowledging the original author or the original source, original creator. So the researcher should not use this Control C and V, and also avoid the research fraud. We have not done any research by publishing the data which is generated by others, or you have manipulated the data which is the result of some others experiment. Or in simple words, I should say that either the researcher is fabricating the data or falsifying the data or changing or omitting the data. So that should not be there, because this all includes as the fabrication and falsification of the research, and that will lead to the research fraud and research misconduct, which would make the researcher to be penalized under the regulations which I have just informed you of 2018. So the researcher should avoid all these things and be concentrate and need to learn more and more things about what is citation, how to decide the resources, and everything the researcher has to learn regarding what is the bibliography, how this annotated bibliography is to be used, what is the difference between the references and bibliography, what are the endnotes, what are the footnotes, is there any difference between these two, how to cite these, all these things, so that the students or the researchers, they may know to acknowledge the work of other, and they will not be involved in the plagiarized research, and whatever they will do, that will be their own. And this is the biggest ethics which is depending upon the honesty, integrity, openness, and at the same time confidentiality also of the researcher. So with these words, I will stop here, as there are many things to share, but because the time is not allowing me and the other sessions are also there. So I stop here, and I would like to thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mathur sir. He just called me that he'll not be available this time. He's busy somewhere else. And Dr. Bhubneswar, she was talking to me